On May 31, 2017, the U.S. Navy accepted into service USS Gerald Ford, the first of up to 4 new fleet carriers. The massive 1,100-foot-long vessel will eventually embark around 60 aircraft, including 24 F-35 Lightning stealth fighters and another 20 to 24 FA-18 Super Hornets. It features a faster elevator for loading munitions and new electromagnetic launch catapults and arresting hooks to increase the tempo of flight operations while reducing maintenance costs. All of these new perks come at roughly a $13 billion price tag, more than twice the cost of the preceding USS George H.W. Bush. The United States nuclear-powered fleet carriers are currently without rival in the world, and their onboard carrier air wings can unleash tremendous sustained firepower. They serve as potent symbols of American military power and floating air bases for campaigns in Libya, Iraq, and the Balkans. But how would the supercarriers fare when taking on something tougher than a third-world despot? Advances in missile and submarine technology put in question whether such large and expensive ships are survivable when operating within striking distance of an enemy coastline. That striking distance is dictated by the roughly 700-mile combat radius of the carrier's F-35C stealth fighters, with a shorter range for the Super Hornets. In-flight refueling may extend that distance a bit, though one should bear in mind that a carrier air wing has only a modest ability to refuel itself with its Super Hornet tankers without resorting to larger land-based tanker support. However, sailing a carrier strike group close enough for its fighters to attack coastal targets also places the carrier well within harm's way of a variety of nasty new weapons. Long littoral reach. One of the newer threats comes from ground-based ballistic missiles, normally a weapon we think of as exclusively used for striking land targets. However, the new Chinese DF-21D intermediate-range ballistic missiles possess a high degree of accuracy and the capability to adjust course mid-flight. Both traits enable the rocket to hit a moving target like an aircraft carrier. The DF-21D East Wind has a range of 900 miles, and can adjust its flight path using targeting data fed to it by other platforms, including a series of Yaogan satellites put into space over the last several years. The U.S. Naval Institute claimed the massive kinetic energy of a descending DF-21D combined with the explosive payload could potentially destroy a carrier in one hit. It's important to note that the East Wind is a mobile weapon system and could prove difficult to preemptively strike. On the other hand, while dozens of the missiles have been deployed to Chinese military units, it doesn't appear that the weapon has ever been tested against a moving naval target. Stealthy submarines or subs with big missiles? Torpedo-launching submarines sank several aircraft carriers during World War II, though both land and carrier-based aircraft played a major role in countering the submarine threat. At the time, submarines were especially vulnerable to patrol planes because they had to surface a couple of times a day to keep their batteries charged. Even when lurking underwater, they relied on noisy air-breathing diesel engines that made them easier to pick up on sonar. Of course, carriers are always escorted by destroyers or frigates specialized in anti-submarine warfare. Furthermore, long-distance maritime patrol planes and shipboard helicopters also assist in sweeping the seas for enemy subs. However, while Russian submarines were initially much noisier than their Western counterparts during most of that period, later Cold War designs, such as the nuclear-powered Akula class, were nearly peers to their Western counterparts in quietness. Nuclear submarines, however, cost well over $2 billion apiece in modern times, so noisier diesel submarines remain more common across the world. However, in the 1990s, Sweden deployed the first submarine to use air-independent propulsion, AIP, the Gotland. A variety of AIP technologies allow for a new generation of very quiet and very cheap ship-hunting submarines that cost as little as roughly 1/6 the price of a nuclear submarine and can operate up to 2 to 4 weeks underwater, albeit at fairly slow speeds. China now possesses 15 Type 41 submarines, employing the same Sterling AIP system as the Gotland, with another 15 planned, while dozens of German-made Type 212, 214, and 218 AIP submarines are entering service across Europe and Asia. In fact, the Pacific in particular has become the site of a veritable submarine arms race. Both nuclear and AIP submarines, including the Gotland, have repeatedly succeeded in sinking aircraft carriers during NATO naval exercises. This is even more alarming considering how cheap the latter type of submarines are to build. In addition to being quiet, AIP submarines possess the range and endurance to hunt for carriers across regional waters, even if most aren't suitable for deep ocean operations. Another limitation is that they are significantly slower than the carriers they're hunting, especially while attempting to maximize battery life, forcing them to rely more on ambush tactics. Still, creeping up to within torpedo range of a carrier strike group is a risky business. Some submarines are designed to hunt their targets from afar. The Russian Oscar-class cruise missile submarine, for example, is not especially stealthy, but it does not have to get close to a carrier group's surface escorts thanks to the 400-mile range of its P-700 Granite missiles, which it can launch while underwater. The 10-meter-long missiles travel at supersonic speeds and are designed to network together to overwhelm defensive countermeasures. Cruise missile defense. This brings us into the realm of missile defense, a long-established threat that carrier strike groups have evolved to counter. While carriers carry short-range anti-aircraft missiles and Phalanx Sea Whiz guns for self-defense, their escorting Ticonderoga-class cruisers and Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are armed with a diverse array of medium and long-range air anti-aircraft missiles, designed to thin out incoming missile barrages from hundreds of miles away. These defenses are backed up by networked radars and coordinated by the sophisticated Aegis defense system. The challenge facing carrier strike groups today is that new anti-ship missiles are becoming faster, longer range, and more widespread, and can be deployed from platforms including long-distance patrol planes and bombers, small and stealthy fast attack boats, and even shipping containers concealed in a harbor. The greater range means new missiles can be more safely lobbed at the carrier without necessarily entering within range for easy retaliation. The greater speed means they're harder to shoot down, and the ability to deploy them from a variety of platforms means the missile launching units might prove difficult to detect and comprehensively eradicate preemptively. Take, for example, the Russian Caliber cruise missile, the Sizzler anti-ship variant of which can strike naval targets up to 400 miles away. The missile skims just above the sea, making it difficult to detect at a distance before leaping up to 3 times the speed of sound on the terminal approach, offering a challenging target for missile defense systems. If a carrier task force's defenses function properly, not something to take for granted when both the attacking and defensive systems have scant operational records, then they should be able to handle a few incoming missiles. However, an attacker would seek to saturate the defender's defenses by launching large volleys of missiles all at once, and it may only take a few getting through to wreak considerable havoc. This, however, brings us to the major critique common to all these carrier-killing tactics. They often require a high degree of coordination, operational planning, and networking. Breaking the kill chain. Set aside the air defense missiles for a moment. A carrier's first defense is that its 1,000-foot-long flight deck is still nothing more than a tiny pinprick measured against the millions of square miles that make up the ocean. A tiny moving pinprick. Not just locating, but also tracking a carrier across all that space relies on having a maritime observation apparatus coordinating long-distance patrol planes, submarines, over-the-horizon radars, and satellites, many of which are vulnerable in turn to a carrier strike group's aircraft and missiles. Once that apparatus identifies a carrier's position, the targeting data needs to make it back in a timely fashion to air, land, or naval units to put them in position for an attack. This sort of queuing is also very important in submarine operations. In many cases, a separate platform will have to network targeting data on the carrier as the launch platforms may be too far away to acquire them on their own radars. Of course, that targeting data may also be disrupted by electronic warfare and defensive countermeasures. Just as likely, the observers may lose track of the carrier task force position before elements can get into place to make the strike. These considerations lead national interest contributor Rob Farley to argue that China and Russia lack adequate maritime intelligence assets and operational experience to mount a well-coordinated maritime search and destroy campaign against a carrier task force, even if they possess armaments that could theoretically prove effective against one. Today's supercarriers will likely serve on for decades. However, the new threats arrayed against them, combined with the limited range of the current generation of carrier-based aircraft, suggest they may prove too vulnerable to operate within striking distance of near-peer opponents. It would make sense to plan future naval strategy around these new adversary capabilities rather than simply doubling down on the supercarrier model because it's worked so far in permissive environments. Solutions that have been suggested to meet the new challenges posed by operating in littoral waters include using long-range carrier-based drones that will allow carriers to operate further afield from dangerous coastlines, relying on stealthy submarines to deliver cruise missile attacks, and distributing firepower across a larger fleet of individually less expensive ships. Above all, planners should seriously consider whether supercarriers loaded with relatively short-range warplanes remain a survivable and cost-efficient linchpin of U.S. naval strategy.